this is Christina Caudill with the Radiant Astrology Podcast. And in this episode, I'll be delving into Neptune's transit through Aries, accompanied also by Saturn. We obviously can't forget about Saturn joining with Neptune in 2025, 2026. And I thought a really great person to discuss all of this with is my colleague, Brian Allemana. Did I pronounce that correct, Brian?
Sure did. You nailed it.
And Brian is a very astute astrologer who I connected last year with through Pacifica's course on archetypal astrology. And I was so impressed by Brian's grasp of astrology and his perspective that I've been looking forward to for the past year of inviting him onto the podcast. You can find Brian at Soul Rise Astrology. And Brian, can you give our listeners a little info about you and some background?
Sure, Christina. Happy to. And thanks for having me on. As you mentioned, I live in Asheville, North Carolina. Moved here from Chicago a few years ago. And I'm an astrologer. I'm a practicing astrologer. I give readings, and I have a blog at my website, soulriseastrology.com. I've been studying astrology since 2007. I studied with Alan Oken, who's kind of a well-known astrologer, apprenticed with him for about 3 years. And, I've been influenced by a number of great astrologers like Dane Rujar and Liz Green and some others. And so astrology's really just been such an important, integral aspect of my own life that, I find myself driven to do as much of this astrological work as I can. So,
absolutely. And what inspired you with Soul Rise Astrology? And I ask that because I feel like your approach to astrology is very soulful, and so I'm wondering, where that came from.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you saying that, because that is certainly my intention, is to bring what I think of as soul awareness into consciousness through astrology. And honestly, the name Soul Rise or Soul Rise Astrology, it actually came to me one morning. This was probably back in 2013. I think I just woke up one morning, and then I'd been thinking about a name for my practice for some time, hadn't quite settled on something I really liked, and it just popped in my mind one morning in a kind of semi-conscious state, and I sat up like, oh, that's it, that's the name. And as far as bringing soul into astrology, or bringing astrology into soul, my first real astrological love in terms of an astrological paradigm that really, struck my soul, my heart, was evolutionary astrology as taught by Jeffrey Wolf Green, and which is predicated on the idea of reincarnation, that the soul comes into incarnation lifetime after lifetime to learn certain lessons, to evolve and to grow, and I think that we live in a world where we are encouraged to be in our ego, to be in the what Eckhart Tolle calls the mind-made self, the sort of false self that we create in our minds of who we think we are. And I think there's a deeper self, or a greater self, that is within us that we can tap into through spiritual practice and through systems, divination systems like astrology, that can take us deeper within our own soul, and thereby deepen into our own consciousness and into our own life, and really enrich our experience of our life, whatever happens to be going on the outside.
That's so beautiful. And I'm glad we share that connection with evolutionary astrology as well. And I think what evolutionary astrologers tend to be great at are really exploring the outer planets. And so Neptune, interestingly, entered Pisces right in 2011, and is now, has now wrapped up. Well, it will have one more little dip into Pisces at the end of 2025. But, we're in new territory with Neptune having entered Aries March 30th. And I really feel that Neptune through Pisces was an opportunity collectively for us all to open up to more of the mystical realm of the collective in society. And of course, for different people, we had different gradients of that. But now going into a fire sign, Aries, the sign of pioneering, of passion, of all of these sort of fiery kind of themes. It's interesting to explore like how
Mhm.
that might shift and change. And of course, we look at things collectively and personally as well. As astrologers, I think so many of us use astrology in terms of, it helps us to heal on some level, on maybe some level that we don't even know consciously. And Neptune going into Aries, I'm wondering how that element that's in our lives, that maybe is that element of our aspirations or where we seek healing or where we dream, even as
Mhm.
signified by Neptune, how
Mhm.
you see it shifting from the watery ocean of Pisces into this fiery realm of Aries.
Yeah, it's a big deal in my mind because Pisces being the last sign of the zodiac and Aries being the first sign. So not only is it a shift from water to fire, but it's a shift from the end to the beginning, or we could say from dissolution to rebirth. And the Neptunian or Neptune and Pisces themes that we've been going through it's the past 14 years or so have been pretty like strongly evident and very challenging, right? And some of the harder, more difficult aspects of that transit of Neptune through Pisces, which brings in great loss, disease as well. So whether it's through COVID or it's through the war in Ukraine or the war in Gaza, mass shootings, I mean, things that just are really incredibly tragic. And the hope then is that there's an awakening in consciousness that we see that something spiritual really needs to come alive, and and that's when Neptune moves into Aries. It begins to stimulate that urge to bring spirit back into focus. And by spirit, we can think of spirit or spirituality from the sense of our connection to the divine, our connection to the numinous or what is mysterious. But also with Neptune, it also comes down to a sense of morality and a sense of connection and unity with others. And so it's my take that we've all been through great challenges with Neptune in transiting through Pisces, these spiritual challenges where we've had to face difficulties and creatively find a way through them. And as a result of going through these challenges and these losses, we hopefully are growing spiritually. And I think any of us who seek to grow spiritually, to evolve in our lives, to grow as people, and to self-reflect, that we have grown spiritually through this transit. And now with Neptune entering Aries, it's a time period where we are being asked to step up spiritually or morally, with moral courage. And so I think that the challenges of Neptune transiting Pisces will be to bring that fire of Aries, that passion of Aries, through our hearts in a compassionate way to stimulate unity. There's been so much dissolution and so much separation. And now with Aries, it's time to stimulate a new kind of unity. And and so, even if we look back in history and we see during Neptune's transit through Aries, people who rise, who are, great moral leaders or spiritual trailblazers, who come in, um, whether it's a poet like Walt Whitman or even the poet Rumi, who was born with Neptune in Aries, evokes that
Oh, I
great,
love that.
passionate, love of the divine. That's Neptune in Aries, like writ large. I think that we're entering a new spiritual rebirth, with Neptune transiting through Aries that's going to be interesting. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Oh, thank you for mentioning about Rumi because Rumi is, both inspiring and just so uplifting and it has that numinous quality, but there's also, some passion behind it. Okay, so I'm going to be using a lot of my Rumi quotes these
Ah,
next few
great,
years.
great. Yes, yes.
And then you said that we have experienced a lot of collective tragedy with, this ending cycle of Neptune through Pisces. And I noticed that it did seem like the past several years there was a lot of training around trauma. Like you don't have to
Mm,
just be a psychologist or a therapist to be trained in trauma. There's, trauma informed at any profession, right? Trauma informed yoga, trauma informed astrology, trauma informed, just about anything. And from hearing you speak, the hope for me is that we have spent a lot of time, you know, investigating our trauma, even dwelling in our trauma. And maybe that was very necessary at that time. And moving into this rebirth of fire that as we move forward, hopefully a lot of that understanding has become integrated,
mm,
right? And maybe we won't have as much time to be dwelling in the trauma, but I think all that has served us. I really think that the planets are, the cosmos is so much smarter than we are. Like they have these cycles for our benefit. And in order to really truly have moral courage, I think we also have to see where, we do have vulnerabilities, where we have been traumatized or harmed. But they say that the soul is never tarnished, right? Even though
mhm,
we as people can feel at times damaged or what have you, the soul really is always pure. And if we can align with that, to me, that seems like very much something that can be motivating in
mhm.
this new realm. And I love that phrase, moral courage. I think that really encapsulates it very well because, you know, Neptune can take us all over the place, right? It can be chaotic. It can be transcending any kind of containers that we may need, that we rely on in our life. But when we think about life being about responding to the world through a center, that center being something that is our morality, our ethics, that which is of most value to us. I think to me, that's that kind of fire that can be ignited that can hopefully carry us forward.
Yeah, yeah, and really essentially understand and really feel our mutual connections and that life on earth is all one life, that essence, it's one life force that connects all of us. And that any harm we do to another is a harm done back to ourselves, is a harm done to the whole world. And so I think Neptune in Aries is a call to recognize that connection and do what we can, take action from, Aries is about taking action, so taking spiritual action to say no more or to say, I'm going to do it differently and I'm going to act with humility and consciousness with the intention to understand how I act affects another, and if it affects them negatively or harms them, then I'm going to make a different choice.
Mm. Yeah, and not being afraid to speak up. I think that's the other thing. I think
Yes,
that
yes,
when I think about maybe a shadow of Pisces, it can be kind of like I can be apathetic and I'll just leave other people to their karma. But I think that when we take a courageous stance, we risk something,
yeah, for sure.
when you're in taking that courageous stance, you maybe risk something that you realize isn't as valuable as standing up for, like you said, for life itself.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think Neptune and Pisces can render us feeling powerless. Why even bother trying, right? It's just not going to do any good. And I think that we need to own the fact that every one of us does have power and can affect to some degree. Even if it's taking our attention into our own consciousness to bring new life into something inside that is seeking to awaken. That is a gift to the world, and I think of Neptune has its connection, of course, to the sea, to the ocean, and it's like when we act compassionately, it's an action that sends ripples along, across that ocean, and we don't necessarily even see how our actions, ripple out and affect others, and so by being compassionate, the ripples that move out have a compassionate tone to them.
Mm. And, I was thinking that obviously these transits don't happen in a vacuum.
Yeah,
And Chiron has been in Aries for a few years now.
yeah,
And so it's almost like already been, we've been primed in a way with this Chiron and Aries that I feel like, that's the wounded warrior in a sense. Like we've
yeah.
started to see, what our wounds collectively, where these sort of sensitive points are. I remember, I believe I know Chiron was in Aries, I think it was conjoined the North Node when um, the the pandemic hit and the people who are on the front lines, the doctors and nurses, to me, they were very chironic because they were the ones fighting this war for all of us. And then there was also all of this, whatever fake news things going on to say that, oh, well, there isn't really a pandemic or whatever. And they were also um, being attacked,
Yeah.
but they were right in the eye of the storm.
True.
And so when you think of an even bigger tidal wave like Neptune coming into this realm of Aries, maybe we will all see that example of the humble warrior,
Mm-hmm.
who still is sticking to their oath
Mm-hmm.
to whatever for them to save lives. And I was just listening to that book on tyranny where they said that, one of the things to, essentially fight tyranny is to stick to your moral center and your professional ethics as well. Because if enough people do that, they won't just be, doing what they're told and then end up inadvertently causing harm on a mass
Yeah.
level, right?
Right.
So I just think of that connection to, the Chiron. I mean, I'm from the Chiron Aries generation. I'm having my Chiron return. So I
Same.
guess that's
Yep.
why
Same.
I'm thinking of that. So how would you see the Chiron kind of playing in this field
Hmm.
of Neptune with Aries?
Well, I think that Chiron in Aries, speaks to wounding that is, whether it's wounding from violence or wounding from male figures, male leaders, or militaristic campaigns, or post-traumatic stress from war experience. These might be all things we kind of tie in with Chiron and Aries. The Chiron and Aries also is reflective of the courage to face one's wounds or to sort of integrate or incorporate one's experience of wounding, so that the experience of the wound, it deepens one at a soul level, makes one wiser and stronger. And the wisdom that is gained through the wound then becomes a kind of medicine that we can bring in and bring out and heal. And Aries is very front line. So to your point about healthcare workers or people who are on the front line of whatever's going on, or people who are on the literal front lines of battle, right now. And I think that as Chiron has been moving through Aries, perhaps as it reaches the last degrees of Aries, we'll see some actualization of healers coming forward to bring wisdom into stopping the violent actions that create so much division. and create so much wounding. And then, in relation to Neptune, Neptune brings in this compassionate focus and emphasis. And as always, every planetary symbol, of course, has its negative or positive, or I like to think of it as like dysfunctional and functional aspects. So, whereas with Chiron, Chiron can be the wounder or can be the healer. Um, and, Neptune can be uh, the spiritual person or someone living from compassion, or it can be someone who lives in deceit. Neptune is not strictly in a conjunction with Chiron, but they are transiting
Right.
the same sign. They're both in kind of that same Aries field. So healing through standing up for one's ethics, as you were describing, bringing healing into the world by way of standing for one's morals and ethics, is one way that healing could come through, or on the negative side or the dysfunctional side, creating wounding through violence of deceit or through gaslighting or and I think that one of the challenges we may see with Neptune transiting Aries, and this might bring in Chiron as well, is the idea of martyring oneself to a cause. And so if we look at the last time Neptune transited Aries, of course, it entered Aries just after the Civil War started, and here in America, there were many Confederate soldiers who gave themselves to this, what they felt was a cause that was a kind of, delusion. That was sort of the belief or the delusion they were fighting for this cause. And, that's a way that Neptune and Aries can show up, sort of martyring for the cause, even if that cause isn't necessarily actually one of, again, of unity or of compassion or of helping to liberate people and alleviate suffering. I mean, Neptune's ideal function is to alleviate suffering in the world, but its negative expression can be to actually create more of it. So, we may see, of course, expressions all along the spectrum there. And I expect that the Chiron dimension brings in, both the wounding and the healing side of those expressions. Yeah.
And something that just came to my mind while you were talking was that I'm thinking of Neptune going through Pisces is kind of like being on the mat, right? Taking our spiritual life, like delving into our spiritual life.
Yes.
And now it's kind of like, get off of the mat. And what are you going to do with all of this? I mean, if we've, anyone who's been in any deep meditation, even for like a minute, can know that, we're infinite on the inside. So that's
Mm.
great. Now it's like putting that into action
Yeah.
and making something of that in this life, right?
Yeah.
And there can be many expressions, as you said. It can be a beautiful reawakening of humanity in the world, but also we could be at war. We could be at war with
Mm.
one another, as you said. Like the last time Neptune entered Aries was the American Revolutionary War. So this fire, as you said, it can help us to not feel powerless as we may have felt before, powerless through, not being able to take action, not knowing what action to take. And it's interesting because I look online and I see, a lot of these activists, talking about waking up and da da da. And you read in the comments and people are like, that's great. What do we do?
Yeah.
How do
Yeah.
we take action? And
Right.
people are really, really looking for that guidance because they're ready to take action, but they don't always know what to do or which direction to go. Um, and of course, with Pluto and Aquarius, I think that's also helping to fuel this. It's in everybody's hands, not just the hands of certain leaders.
I love your point about people are thirsty for action. They really want to uh, um, take action, in a positive way to stop the division and stop the violence and bring in more unity. And I think that part of what helps that is and helps people understand, first of all, that they can take action and that they are equipped to, and then second of all, to understand what action they can take. I think that that can people can be inspired by artists and even political leaders. I mean, I've really been impressed by, there was the day that I think it was the day that Neptune first entered Aries a few couple weeks ago, when Senator Booker, Cory Booker, gave that 25-hour long speech. And it was just like dripping with Neptune and Aries types of statements, about, this being our moral moment, and quoting John Lewis around, making good trouble. These, to bring people together to do what's right. And I think he invoked the words moral courage, I think more than once. And that would be one example of a political leader really putting himself up front to bring inspiration to doing what is right. And then, we have Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland has said that he's going to El Salvador to visit Kilmar Garcia, who has been wrongfully detained there. And, just an example of someone in the political sphere willing to get right to the heart of it, go right to where the problem is and represent the goodwill of not just himself, but the goodwill of his constituents, to say, hey, we don't want you incarcerated. We want to bring you home, and we're doing everything we can to bring you home. And so, to me, that's another example. And I think we may see, artists, musicians, poets, bringing inspiration. I think of, Walt Whitman's poetry through the poems that he wrote as Neptune was transiting Aries in the 1860s, that were, very inspirational and just very beautiful.
Remind us about his work, because it's about living in nature, right? Is it that sort of
Yeah,
pioneering spirit, or?
yeah, and living in nature, being connected to the body, really feeling into one's life force. I sing the body electric. Like, to me, that's so. There's a lot of Aries in that image of it's the fire of life, and the vitality of the basic essential vitality that is at the core of us, that seeks to expand and go out and be in contact with the world and with nature. And I think that, yeah, to me, there's a very sort of Neptune and Aries kind of vibe there.
Yeah. And what you said about Cory Booker, I thought what was also very Neptunian was he didn't stop, right? He just kept going
Yep.
and going and going,
Yeah.
and couldn't even go to the bathroom, like,
Right.
but he prepared for it, like
Yep.
as if he were going on, to hike Mount Kilimanjaro or something, right? He
Right.
he he did all the preparation of fasting, and he was ready to sort of take it on physically as well
Yes.
as spiritually and everything like that. So I think that that's a really interesting image of, someone taking something on as if they were, they have to prepare themselves physically, spiritually, mentally. They need to have the stamina and the resilience, to take on this. Ultimately, like you said, it was taking on something with moral courage.
Yeah.
And I want to also just kind of fold into that Saturn is, hot on Neptune's heels, coming
Yes. Yes.
into Aries soon. And Saturn and Neptune have been quite close to one another all year so far, and then they'll get really close, almost a conjunction in July, right?
Mm.
of 2025. And then their actual conjunction is in February 2026. But this entire time, they will be essentially, very close to a conjunction. And something that was said by Lawrence Hillman in our course was that Neptune, it being an outer planet, will overwhelm any of the other
Mhm.
planets, that
Mhm.
aren't outer planets, when it comes into contact with it. So, like for instance, like Saturn will become more Neptunian or will be influenced more so by Neptune than Neptune by Saturn. And I always kind of intuitively felt that. I don't know if all astrologers would agree with that, but I feel like that generally is the case. And now Saturn itself is very substantial too, right? Generally,
Sure.
Saturn wins out over other inner planets, but with Neptune, some of the things that historically have happened is like Saturn being that symbol of an empire or a government or a country or something like that. And whether its boundaries start changing, transforming, or falling and collapsing, or dissolving.
Mhm.
That's the kind of thing I think globally we may see, but also even just in terms of, our own our reaction to authority, like not accepting the typical authority as, the authority, the boundaries of authority and things like that. And that can also have positive and,
Sure.
not so positive expressions. I mean, for one, we just saw the current administration completely ignore the Supreme Court, a
Yeah.
Supreme Court ruling. We may see more of that. We may see more of just average people not feeling like they need, this can be anarchy. And in fact, I think it was the astrologer S.J. Anderson who'd said that he looked back at when Neptune and Saturn conjoined in Aries, and it was in like 500 BC or something. It was like a long, long, long time ago, like probably not going to come up in your solar fire, but it was at the time there was complete anarchy. And that was actually a time then, and he named the philosopher, I can't think of it right now, but then as this famous philosopher actually created the idea of democracy out of that time. So democracy was created out of anarchy the last time
Hmm.
Saturn and
Interesting.
Neptune conjoined in Aries. So it was almost like a new concept that was needed because there was a failure of any kind of order in
Hmm.
society. And so,
Interesting.
again, history doesn't necessarily repeat, but it can echo and we can see some
Yeah.
similar themes. So,
For sure, for sure. And that's all really interesting. And I I think that it's possible too that when there are conjunctions with an outer planet, that there can become um, one can feel themselves identified with the outer planet. And so you brought up a great example of the administration ignoring the courts, um, and saying, this traditional authority has no authority over me. I'm just going to dissolve that boundary, dissolve that authority, and just declare it's not doesn't apply to me. And that's to me is almost like um, sort of like invoking that transit, saying, "Okay, I'm the ultimate authority." Uh, so I am the ideal of Neptune, and I am the unity. I am the God. I am the divine force that is going to declare, and true to Saturn, that is going to set the rules and be the authority. I mean, we can even say with Saturn and Neptune conjunct, we could think of that as, in a sense, divine authority. And what can happen, and I think we see this in history, again, is people who take on that archetype as if they are that archetype. And when that happens, it never ends well, because it's like a possession by the archetype, and when that happens, then it's like the archetype doesn't have any uh, and it doesn't have any concern for the little ego who has identified with that, with that sort of larger aspect of consciousness. That that archetype is not concerned with that ego's concerns, and it's sort of working itself through that individual. And but then when its goals are achieved, the individual is not doesn't matter. So I hope that that's clear, making some sense, because I think that we see this in history where certain people have a kind of delusion of grandeur, where they're not, someone like Donald Trump, I don't think is saying to himself, I am Neptune, or I am Neptune and Saturn. But in a sense, he is in a certain way. And by saying, I'm the authority, no one can tell me differently, and believing that that's going to somehow work out. And I think that that's, for anyone who sort of plays that game, I think it's a dangerous one. But I think also that the idea of Saturn and Neptune coming together and there being a kind of dissolution of boundaries or a dissolution of authority is, I think we see that over and over again in history. And of course, we see that most pronounced in the history of Russia. I know a number of astrologers, talk about this. It is pretty fascinating how the history of Russia appears to be tied to the cycle of Saturn and Neptune.
Oh, enlighten us a little bit on that, please.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's going back to when Neptune was discovered, which I believe was 1846, I think was the year. Um, that was just before, it might have even been during the very beginning of a Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And just as that Saturn-Neptune conjunction was separating in 1848, Karl Marx published his Communist Manifesto. So while that was not in itself a political revolution, it certainly was a revolution in terms of in the collective psyche of Russia, like planting the seed that would later burst into a real revolution during, first of all, the next Saturn-Neptune conjunction was in 1881, and I think the Russian Emperor Alexander, I'm forgetting the details here, but the Russian emperor was assassinated, and that was also the year that the what became the Soviet Party, the Communist Party, was born during that time. So the following conjunction was 1917 during the Bolshevik Revolution. Again, a massive change in government leadership in Russia, was followed by the civil wars in Russia. And then the next conjunction, 1953, was when Stalin died. And then the next was 1990 with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the dissolution of the USSR. So every time Saturn and Neptune have been conjunct over the past century, we see, again, just massive change in Russian leadership. So here we are, Saturn and Neptune are coming into conjunction again. Putin's position, depending on how you look at it, looks kind of precarious. And we'll see what manifests from here on out. But I think a kind of, a dramatic shift in leadership is possible, very possible.
That's interesting. Yes, and just remind our listeners that 1989 was the last time that Saturn and Neptune met, and that was in Capricorn.
Yes.
And Saturn-Neptune conjunction happens about every, I think, 39 years. That being in Capricorn, obviously, that's a very Capricornian symbol of, literal wall breaking down, crumbling,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Right.
Whereas even the day before, if you went anywhere near trying to climb the wall or any near the wall, you get shot and killed, right? And
Right.
then, but we see these images of everybody, basically celebrating all over this wall.
Right.
And it's really powerful to think that it's just simply our conceptions of what a boundary is. And that suddenly
Absolutely.
just dissolved. And I think that alone, even though, again, we're in a different times, there's different things happening in the sky. This is, Aries, not Capricorn, but that essential thing is what's holding. And so when
Yeah.
people want to know how, what can they expect in their lives or what should they look for in their lives, I would look at these structures that we depend on in our own personal lives that perhaps are, like you said, in a precarious position. And Saturn can be literally structures that we depend on to uphold the shape of our lives or bond us to something that we think, we need or we're dependent on. And they can even, it's often said that Saturn in the natal chart is symbolic of our fears as
Mm-hmm.
well, like our natal Saturn and the fears that we need to overcome in order to grow stronger or more mature or have mastery in some way. And I've talked to a lot of clients who they have a sense of what that is no longer sustainable in the way that it has been. And so, and I actually saw a series of clients that were all, and actually a lot of them were, had signatures in Aries that they built something and, they worked hard. It was kind of a foundation in their life, but yet they were ready to move on, but they almost weren't ready to let go of this thing that they had almost mothered their whole life and
Mm-hmm.
created, and
Mm-hmm.
shaped,
Mm-hmm.
and but they kind of knew in their heart that it's complete or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. I mean, again, this
Yeah.
can be different for different people, but I did see
Absolutely.
that as something that seemed to keep coming up. And that for some people, it was time to have a succession plan. Maybe it's time to
Mm-hmm.
hand it over to someone else. Maybe it's time to start
Exactly.
thinking about, you know, start having trust maybe in someone else to
Mm-hmm.
carry something on, this legacy on in their own way, and then they can establish their legacy. And then what's opening from there is, what is the new dream? That's usually what Neptune tends to
Mm.
ask us is what is that
Absolutely.
new dream that's ready to ripen,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah, I love that. The Neptune and Aries is definitely bringing in the idea of of bringing to life a new dream. We can even look back in prior transits of Neptune through Aries, where certain um, whether it's through certain people or organizations or just events that showed up that brought in a new vision for reality. And I think that I think we're all kind of ready and maybe hungry for that to to what is the new reality that it seems like reality's just been falling apart and does what's true, what's real, who knows anymore, right? And it's been feeling like that for some time. And I think that we're ready for a new vision to guide us forward. I do also think that whatever that vision is, it's created collectively, and that we can serve that vision by articulating it. Whether we're in meditation, imagining how we want our own reality to look or how we want the world to look, um, or we are taking action in a way that is towards a new vision of reality that we want to see in the world, maybe one of more integrity, of more compassion, of more connection. Um, and I think that you're right. I mean, with Neptune, whenever Neptune crosses a personal planet, there is usually a process of letting go that is being asked for or being required. And if we try to hold on, and it may not be something physical, I mean, true to Saturn, if Saturn and Neptune come into conjunction and that's in alignment with a natal planet, then certainly probably it's referring to something structural that is being either asked to let go or asking to rebuild or reformulate. Um, but Neptune in alignment with a personal planet, and it could be letting go of some kind of attachment to something. It could be an attachment to an emotion, or attachment to a relationship, or attachment to an ideal. And it's not that the necessarily that the physical thing has to be let go, but that the attachment to it has to be let go. And Neptune will typically bring in experiences that encourage that. Sometimes it's a very, especially with Neptune, it's a very mysterious kind of psychic or emotional, I don't feel about this the way I used to. And I keep trying to grasp for that feeling again, but I can't seem to get it back, you know? And so that's like it's like something at a psychic level is separating, and we need to honor that shift. And ideally, what's occurring is that we are coming into contact with whatever that thing that we are attached to, whatever energy it was holding for us. We actually have it within our own psychic being. And when we can tap into it within ourselves, we don't need to be attached. We can still have that outer thing. It can still bring us beauty. It can still enrich our lives, or it can move on. But we're no longer in a state of either, loving it because it's so wonderful, or suffering from it because it's not giving us what we want, what we think it should give us. So, yeah,
Oh, I love that. And it made me think of how, during Neptune and Pisces, there has been a epidemic of addiction, right? Whether
sure.
it's, addiction to, there's all these drugs that have just kind of come into the collective. And at times it was extreme, in certain, parts of the country. And it's almost like, in some ways, maybe we all had some escapism, right? Some
Sure.
wanting to numb ourselves. And I feel like with all this fire, hopefully there'll be a lot less tendency to want to ignore and tune out and, again, be numb, or not feeling of the world. I think, the past several years, the ideal of being at peace and not letting anybody disturb my peace. And while that can still be true to a certain extent, it's also like that fire is really calling for
Hmm.
expression in some way. And I love how, you liken it to, we can be addicted to another person, or addicted to our quote unquote guru or whatever. And there's
Sure.
usually
Sure.
a time when we turn away. Like even when I used to do courses and things like that, when I would have a student who maybe had gone to all of my courses and taken all of my things, and then suddenly they seem restless, and they suddenly don't want to listen to me, or they suddenly know
Yeah.
better. And it's usually because it's like, maybe it's time that you started teaching, you
Hmm.
know enough.
Hmm.
And having that shift of, but I'm a student, I'm not a teacher. And, there's usually this kind of needing to awaken to, it's not that there's anything wrong with the teacher. It's not like that they're suddenly stale, or they've turned bad or whatever necessarily. A lot of times it's that the student has grown to a certain stage that they don't need that, I guess
Yeah.
that support anymore. That maybe
Yeah.
it's time that they shore up their own shoulders. They've been
Yeah.
standing on the shoulders of giants, and it's time to shore up your own shoulders so that
Yeah.
eventually others can stand on you, and that you can be part of that, great tradition.
Yeah, yeah, that's really nice. I think that it's not, it's not easy, right? Like it's kind of, if we're if we've been putting the energy into it, we've been projecting the energy into another person, let's say the spiritual teacher or the guru or whatever, and saying they hold the energy, but really it's really projected from, using the Jungian terminology, from the unconscious onto the other person. Um, and and so the work is to reclaim that energy, or to withdraw that projection, and understand that, I can make that conscious within myself now. I've done the work. I've done whatever, the training, or the, I've been devoted to whatever the practice is, and now I'm ready to carry this forward and to teach myself, and become the guru.
Mhm.
Um, and I one of my main spiritual teachers, his name's John Cicelli. He's from originally from Chicago, and he would point out that the word guru, if you separate out the letters, it's G, you are you. So it's like directing you back in that you are the guru, and it's not that we don't benefit from our teachers. Of course we do, but we should always be redirected back to that the guru is within ourselves, and the work is to discover that and to embody it. Yeah.
hmm And I also remember hearing somewhere that the guru's job is to be basically that projection, board or whatever.
Yes. Yes.
And to hold that projection and then to know how to try to give it back when the time is right and to do
Yes.
so in a way that is, sensitive and respectful. And there's that great book by Robert A. Johnson, The Inner Goals,
Yes.
which
Wonderful book.
has a lot to do with this very type of dynamic, actually. And
Mm.
so I love that where we've landed
Mm.
in exploring that. Really, that so many people who have been on this spiritual path that have a lot of times, in the beginning, we may feel like we're being self-indulgent and we're just taking, I just want to come and like see Brian Allemana like play for me, like, but there's a time when you take from what you've received
Yeah.
and then can make it your own in a way. And then you find yourself in a new space where you'll also have to be able to hold this energy and hold this fire and do something with it and create with it. And I think that's what a lot of people have been wanting on an air level. Not that we've been wanting to be challenged in this way, but here we
Yeah.
are. And
Yeah.
as you said, I think so many people are capable and ready to to live with that moral courage.
Yeah. Yeah. And to actualize it, make it real. And, I just like to say that I'm ultimately optimistic with, looking at these transits and where, and just the studying that I've done of these transits and of history and of what other astrologers have said or are saying. I am optimistic about where this is all heading. And I think, even just within the next couple of years, we may see some things really kind of turning around. Not by any means a perfect world, but I think that I think there are big shifts on the way with all the outer planets coming into alignment, with Saturn and Neptune. Um, so I think it's definitely a very interesting time.
Mhm. Well, I'd love to have you back to talk more about these interesting times we're in.
Sure, I'd
Um,
love to.
and for now, where can people find you and what do you have
Sure,
coming
sure.
up?
Sure. Well, people can find me at my website, soulriseastrology.com, SOULRISE astrology.com. And I have a contact form there, or you can email me at brian@soulriseastrology.com. I do have a Facebook page. I'll admit I'm not super active on social media, um, but I do have a
But you
Facebook
do
page.
have a Substack, right? Is it Substack
No,
or is it newsletter?
it's an email newsletter that
Mhm.
comes out through my website. Yeah. So I have thought a lot about getting a Substack account going. But for now, my website is like the central place to you know, read my work and get up to date on what I'm doing, or contact me. I also have a form for requesting readings if anyone's interested in
Hmm.
an astrological reading, natal chart reading. Um, and as far as things coming up, uh, I've got some talks coming up. I've got a couple here in Asheville, one that's been scheduled for early June, June 8th in Hendersonville. I'll be giving more details on that through my website pretty soon. I've been giving a talk this year called The Outer Planets, Transformers of Psyche and World. and I plan to give that talk over Zoom and record it, and I'll put that up on my website as well. And so, and then I know you've got this exciting event coming up in August that I'm looking
Yes.
forward to being a part of that as well. And so, yeah, yeah, that's what I
Yeah. Well,
got.
I hadn't officially announced it, but I'll go ahead and announce a little bit, give people a teaser that I'll
Sure.
be doing a summit in August. And Brian has generously offered to be one of my speakers. And I'll have more information coming out soon. But Brian, I really hope that more and more people find you. I think you've got such a great perspective, and I've learned so much from you. I know we were both students in the course, but I felt you were like one of the teachers, the unofficial teachers of the
Thanks.
course.
Appreciate that.
Um, and again, I'd love to have you back on the podcast. And I so enjoy speaking with you, and I look forward to collaborating with you more.
Yes. Thank you so much, Christina. It's been a pleasure, and likewise, I look forward to coming back and further collaboration. Sounds great.